Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So today's topic, net neutrality, the on again, off again, on again, off again, almost on again, but it looks like maybe now permanently off the table broadband regulations that would regulate broadband operators and traffic, those kinds of things. Be right back and we'll talk about that. Hey, thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here with Zquorum. So I wanted to talk about net neutrality. Here we are at the beginning of a new year, and just learned very recently that the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals has struck down the regulations that the FCC was planning on implementing once again on net neutrality. This was something that the Biden administration put forward back in April and was challenged pretty quickly. And we all kind of realized it was not going to go anywhere, just because of the direction that the courts were moving, especially once it was clear that Donald Trump was coming back in office. We knew that that was another reason that this wasn't going to go anywhere. So where are we? How did we get here? Really, that's the first thing, is how do we get here? So net neutrality has been around as far as the concept of it since the 90s, but really started to get more recognized in the early 2000s. And in 2007 is really when the first controversy came up about it. Comcast was throttling P2P traffic, that's peer-to-peer traffic. Primarily, I think BitTorrent was the issue. BitTorrent was a peer-to-peer or P2P application that people would use. And it was used back then. This was something very new to internet service providers at the time, where suddenly there was a lot of traffic that was on their network. The internet was growing. This was prior to video becoming a big source of traffic for internet service providers. So in general, they only had to worry about having enough bandwidth for things like email and web surfing, occasional file downloads, file uploads, those kinds of things. But there wasn't a lot of traffic yet on the internet. And what started to happen was we had these peer-to-peer or P2P applications where it started to really impact internet service providers' networks. And the way they looked at it, and it was valid in a sense, the way they were looking at it was, this was a lot of traffic that was not from their actual customers that suddenly they were having to handle. And, for example, the way that this would work is somebody would have BitTorrent or another P2P kind of program on their computer, and BitTorrent, again, was the one that they were throttling at the time. But that software, BitTorrent, and that server was generally used to share files, but it started to being used for sharing copyrighted information, software that was not owned, and movies that were not owned, those kinds of things. I forget what you call it, but anyway, in any event, this was content that was not owned by that person, but they would go ahead and share it up there. So they'd put it on there. They wouldn't share it up there. They'd actually put it on their computer. And then people from all over the world could come and grab that pirated software. That's the word I was looking for, pirated software or bootleg movies, those kinds of things. So it was a lot of traffic, especially on the upstream for, let's say, an internet service provider where that was not all those people were not their customers. They had one customer who was putting files like that, again, bootleg kind of stuff, generally things that were not supposed to be legal to do, copyright issues, those kinds of things. They'd put it on their computer, and then people from around the world would come grab that stuff. So it was a lot of traffic, and the ISPs were looking at it like, hey, this is not, all these people are not our customers. We got this one customer, he's doing something he's not supposed to be doing. So they started to throttle some of that BitTorrent traffic. They could do that by looking at the protocols. There was a big business at the time for doing this deep packet inspection and being able to throttle traffic based on protocols. And it was looked at, that's not really a net neutral kind of thing if you're blocking that traffic, but the internet service providers were looking at it as a network management kind of thing, because again, these were customers that weren't supposed to be serving this. It would be like saying that, it would be saying a residential customer could put up a web hosting server, a web server in their home network on their residential service, and then suddenly all of that traffic would be from all over the world would be coming up through there. So that was something that the internet service providers were trying to prevent. And Comcast, again, to do that, they were blocking BitTorrent traffic. And what was happening around the time that somebody noticed this was that BitTorrent started to be used for valid reasons in large situations where it would be noticed, and that would be, for example, gaming companies, when they would do an update of their gaming software, they would use BitTorrent to go ahead and distribute those updates. And if somebody could not get that update because BitTorrent was blocked, then that became an issue. So there were some folks that noticed that, and they went to the FCC. The FCC looked at it, and they went ahead and said Comcast can't do that. They claimed authority under the Communications Act of 1934, and that's where the controversy has been all this time, is can internet service providers be regulated under that? Certainly telephone companies can be. And, of course, that Communications Act was updated in 1996, I think it was. But the question was, are broadband operators common carriers like a telephone company? And in the Communications Act, the later one in the 90s, said they are information service providers. So they were not common carriers, but the FCC wanted to categorize them as common carriers in this case. So they did issue that order. Comcast complied with the order, but they still asked for judicial review of that order. And then in 2010, a circuit court came back and they vacated the order. So Comcast said, we're going to continue to cooperate with the FCC, and that they basically stopped that practice. But the FCC saw that as a loss. This was, of course, all this started during the Obama administration. The Obama administration, then in 2010, and the FCC introduced the Preserving Internet Freedom rules that they put together, and that was another attempt at being more defined on the use of that. I believe that was still Title II, but being more defined on that. It passed in 2011, and then shortly after it passed, Verizon launched a lawsuit, and then flash forward to 2014, Federal Appeals Court strikes down the FCC's 2010 rule. So again, another loss there for net neutrality and a loss there from the Obama administration. So they put it forward again in 2015, tweaked it a little bit. Again, this was, I'm pretty sure, was Title II. Again, looking at that being Title II. They issued that. In 2016, a federal appeals court actually upheld those rules. So it looked like net neutrality was here to stay. But this was all done, again, through the agency. It was not legislation that was done. So it wasn't an actual law that was put into place. These were rules or regulations that were put in place by an agency of the executive branch of the federal government, not legislation from the legislative branch. So because it's not legislation, the Trump administration comes in 2017, and they reversed the Title II designation for broadband operators, and that basically got rid of the net neutrality regulations. And of course, when the Trump administration is doing this, there was a lot of hyperbole about what would happen. It would be the end of the internet. You wouldn't be able to go where you wanted to go, and people would, and there was outrage, partly because of the hyperbole coming from one side saying how this was the end of the world as we knew it. And then also, I think the Trump effect, Trump derangement syndrome, people just piling on, those people that really could not stand Donald Trump this was another cause. So there was a lot of outrage when that happened, but we haven't had net neutrality regulation since, and it's not been the end of the world. So I think that's one reason why now that this new decision came down, that these new net neutrality regulations from the Biden administration aren't going forward, there hasn't been the outcry that we've seen last time. There's still people that are complaining, but I think most people realize, so what? Nothing really changed. People still say that there can be abuses in the future, and I'm sure they're going to say that, but we haven't seen the kind of reaction that we saw last time. So again, 2017, Trump administration reversed that. 2021, as I was mentioning, Joe Biden, his administration, the FCC issued an executive order to re-implement Title II. That was just an executive order at that point. 2021, July, I think, so not long after he took office, and it took a really long time for him to get a fifth commission member on the FCC. So in the FCC, you've got 5 members of the commission. You've got generally is broken down by partisan sides, and the party that's in power has 3 commissioners, and the party that's not in power has 2 commissioners. And Biden only had 4, so he needed to get his 5th on there in order to be able to do something like net neutrality. And it took until 2023 for him to get that 5th seat. Part of that was because they just had a very slim majority in the Senate, kind of in the same situation as the Republicans are in now. Very slim majority. And he had put somebody forward who was controversial. Gigi Sohn, controversial for comments she had made in the past that conservatives didn't like. So she didn't get a vote for 16 months and eventually withdrew. So finally, in 2023, Biden got his fifth seat. That was Ana Gomez. So they could then move forward on some of the things that they wanted to do. And again, in 2024 of April, the FCC passed these new net neutrality rules. But by that point, there were things going on that people knew these were not going to last because again, times had changed. We had been without net neutrality for a while. So the impetus for that, a lot of that went away as far as people thinking we really needed it. And then secondly, we had changes in the Supreme Court when Trump was in place, and the courts have been moving in the direction of basically trying to rebalance the balance of power. So being the executive branch has the ability to not to make laws in a sense. So you've got the legislative branch that makes the laws, the executive branch carries out the laws, and it was seen that what some agencies were doing was actually making law or interpreting laws, having too much power interpreting laws. And some of that had to do with something called Chevron deference, which was back from a case long ago about the Environmental Protection Agency. But the courts at that time said, you know what, these agencies know best, so we're going to give them some leeway on certain questions that they would know better. So we'll give them that deference. We'll defer to them on some of these items. But over time, the court has gone in the other direction and said, you know what, we can't give too much leeway to these unelected officials, because really that's what you're talking about as you've got these agencies. These folks are not elected, they're appointed. No, they're appointed by somebody who's elected, but the people that are supposed to be passing the laws are Congress, basically, your House of Representatives and the Senate, and they pass the laws, and they're elected by the people of the states. So the Chevron deference thing in recent rulings was overturned in a case called Looper Bright, where now they say that the agencies on major kinds of questions that are significant questions are not supposed to have or should not have that kind of ability to interpret laws like that. So in the case of net neutrality, that's really significant because, again, net neutrality with Title II, you're talking about, again, legislation back from the 1930s, updated in the 1990s, really when broadband was barely getting it off the ground. And also in the 1990s, they identified carriers under Title II, telephone companies, and broadband information, or I shouldn't say that, I should say information service providers, which would fall, the internet providers would fall under that. So there was already kind of this thinking that you don't have broadband operators as Title II or common carriers, but they're information service providers. And that's what this latest ruling came out and said was, yeah, they're information service providers. So that's kind of where we are today. And certainly now, again, with Donald Trump winning the election, his pick for the chairman of the FCC is Brendan Carr, who's been on the FCC and been an outspoken critic against. In fact, we'll take a look at some of the things that he said about the net neutrality rules that they were planning on passing. A big critic against the net neutrality regulations that they were trying to pass, and Republicans in general are going to be want light touch or no regulation if it's not needed, and that's kind of the opinion of Brendan Carr, and it's been the opinion of me since the very beginning when they started talking about net neutrality. Was we didn't have a problem yet, so why are we going to put all these regulations on broadband operators when it's not been demonstrated that we have a problem? And again, there was the Comcast thing, and there were one or two other things, but they were always handled. And even with the FCC, that rule being vacated later, Comcast, they went to court, and it was not good for them. So they had it's not good publicity, and they realized, I think, and other broadband or internet providers at the time realized if they do misbehave, then actual legislation could follow, or again, you might be pulled into court and have to deal with all that. So there's always that threat that can help keep people in line. And with the FCC, you've got the FTC that can enact rules and, as far as consumer protections, those kinds of things. So there's still methodologies there to take care of this. So there hasn't been an issue, and we have noticed that, since the rules went away, when the first Trump administration overturned them, the world hasn't ended. everybody can still get where they want to get on the internet. And that's always the concern is, are we going to be blocked from going somewhere? Is it going to be slow for me and fast for other people? And we haven't seen that other than, people can buy certain speeds. They can pay for more speed or not. That's something that's just a free market. So I did want to take a look at a couple of documents here that were related to the rules that were passed in April. So first we've got Chairwoman Rosenworcel's statement. She's the current FCC chairwoman. And then we're going to see a statement from Brendan Carr, who at the time was, or still is on the commission, but was not, obviously he's going to be the next chairman of the FCC. But he's got a statement basically countering what she said here. So you'll notice as I go through this, she doesn't talk a lot about actual net neutrality on these regulations. It's really about other stuff. And it's other stuff that's, again, not related to net neutrality. So this was right here. A reason that none of this made sense was because a lot of the things they were saying they needed were not net neutral kinds of things. They were other things. So you see here it was safeguarding and securing open internet. This was her statement. She mentions here, when Washington stepped out, California, she's talking about here. So, again, I say, Brendan Carr says, and others say, the world didn't end when net neutrality rules were pulled away. We didn't have problems before they were put in place. The Obama administration put them in place. Nothing really changed. They went away. Nothing really changed. So she's claiming here that even though the federal government stepped away, that some states stepped in, and that's making these companies behave because if they've got to do something in one state, they might as well do it everywhere. I think that's the thought here. So she says, when Washington stepped out, California rode in with its new open internet regime. Other states, too, all in all, nearly a dozen, put net neutrality rules into state law, executive orders, and contracting policies. So, in effect, we have net neutrality policies that providers are abiding by right now in this country. They are just coming from Sacramento and places like it, that being the capital of California. She says, I think in modern digital economy, we should have a national net neutrality policy and make clear the nation's expert on communications has the ability to act when it comes to broadband. This is good for consumers, good for public safety, and good for national security. And that is why we are taking this action under Title II of the Communications Act. So again, they were trying to implement again those Title II regulations, and Biden had put that into an executive order back in 2021. So she says here, let's talk about public safety. So again, this is net neutrality, but she's wanting to talk about public safety. She says we cannot collect mandatory data about broadband outages. They actually can, as Brendan Carr will note, but how is that related to net neutrality? The importance of public safety and broadband was driven home to me earlier this month when I visited the Santa Clara County Fire Department. They told me how when they were responding to an emergency, they discovered that the internet connection in one of their command vehicles was being throttled, compromising their ability to keep connected and fight fires. They want net neutrality rules back. And we'll see what the actual facts are about that here in a moment. She says, let's talk about national security. Again, she's talking about national security and not net neutrality. There are vulnerabilities in our broadband networks, and our ability to do something about them was sidelined by the FCC withdrawing from this arena. Cybersecurity, she mentions that. Security issues with data centers. She says this is not about rate regulation, no way, or no how, no way. And that is a concern that conservatives have, is that these rules, as you give the FCC access or more access to these regulations, that you could have creep in what they're allowed to do, including rate regulations. And we've seen that, there's, through the BEAD Act, they're wanting to, have minimum pricing for certain broadband products that would be forced on broadband operators. You've got in other liberal areas like New York, there's a $15 requirement for broadband operators. They've got to offer a $15 product for certain groups. So these are things that, again, the government gets involved in free markets that conservatives don't like. So that is one of the reasons that people didn't want to give these expansive Title II communications kind of leeway to broadband operators, and this has really, pricing is not regarding net neutrality. That's more about affordability. So these things all being put together under this old Communications Act doesn't make a lot of sense. And the fact that it's being done, it's been like this ball that's been batted back and forth between administrations. I'm sure they were hoping that Joe Biden was going to win, that they could get this through, and then from there that it would last for at least another 4 years. But now Trump's coming in, so even if it didn't, the Trump FCC, this is not legislation. The Trump FCC could come in and just reverse it right away again. So where does it stand now? It's pretty much dead, at least until the next 4 years are over, because the Trump administration is not going to re-implement them, and they would have reversed the Title II stuff back to Title I, just as they had done back in 2017. So that's where we are today. And let's see if she has anything else here. That's pretty much. So I linked to this, and I linked to Brendan Carr's statement as well, which we'll look at now. So this was Brendan Carr. Again, he's going to be the incoming FCC chairman. He's been on the FCC for a while, and he's been the most outspoken Republican, I believe, on the commission. As I've seen, he's always got a statement about something, and he had a statement here. He says that Carr fact checks President Biden's myth-filled plan for expanding government control of the internet, and some of the things he mentions here. Says he covers some of the things that she talked about. Says, number one, myth number one here, Title II is necessary to ensure free and open internet. And again, there was very little about that in Chairwoman Rosenworcel's statement about it. Not a whole lot about free and open internet, other than the fact that the states now have some rules in place. So we have net neutrality because the states have it in place. So again, why, if that really is the case, why do we need a federal law or federal regulations if it's being done because the states have the regulations in place? But so you see here, he says, this myth debunks itself. Americans' own experiences have demonstrated that Title II is a solution that doesn't work to a problem that doesn't exist. Mentions here, 6 years ago, Americans lived through one of the greatest hoaxes in regulatory history. It really was funny, some of the things that they were saying would happen once the net neutrality regulations had been pulled away, what people were saying would happen. It says in 2017, when FCC overturned the Obama administration's failed 2-year experiment with Title II regulation, proponents predicted the end of the internet as we know it. And actually, if you click on that link, I think that leads to some funny stories. And that you'll get internet one word at a time. None of the apocalyptic predictions came to pass. Instead, Americans benefited from lower prices, faster speeds, increased competition, and accelerated internet builds. And I'm not going to fact check him. I don't know for sure. I don't know the details there. But the FCC's latest set of claims fare no better than those trotted out back then. That's why it invents so many new justifications. They are throwing everything they can think of against the wall, but none of it sticks. And that's kind of how it looks, is that it's not much about the neutrality of the traffic on the internet. It's more about all these other things that the FCC said they were going to lose the ability to do if they didn't have these regulations in place. But then how can you lose the ability to do something if they weren't in place anyway? So myth Title II is necessary because there has been no federal oversight over this vital service since the FCC's 2017 decision. And I might add, prior to that either. Fact here, right now, the federal government oversees and regulates broadband providers. That's true. I mentioned the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has jurisdiction over ISPs. So there's a lot of rules out there. And that's one of the reasons that you want to try to limit new rules coming in, because generally you can make do with the rules that you have on the books and not have to add more rules, which adds more burden on businesses. And that's always bad, because if you add more burden on businesses, then you've got, well, let's look at today. You've got, we're trying to keep prices down. So the more regulatory burdens you put on broadband operators, the more attorneys they have to hire, maybe the more people they have to do to manage reporting and all those kinds of things. And suddenly the price of your internet goes up. Or maybe they don't expand. Maybe they don't go into, there are lots of operators right now that could be looking at BEAD, but I think are deciding they don't want to do it because of some of the rules that are in the BEAD program related to employment, related to environment, lots of different things in there that are not so much about broadband, but are ancillary kinds of things. And again, it has to do with regulations, reporting, those kinds of things that companies don't like to deal with. So it's not good for business generally to have more regulation unless there's a need for it. Now, that's what's important. If there's really a need, then you address that need. And the best thing to do is to address it through Congress, through laws that would then be permanent, or certainly be harder to get rid of than something that the next administration can come in and just then reverse it. Myth: Title II is necessary for consumer privacy. The FTC already regulates ISPs and their privacy practices. So again, this is consumer privacy, which has nothing really to do with net neutrality, and the FTC is already there. Title II is necessary for national security, another myth. The FCC has identified no gap in national security that Title II is necessary to fill. Rather, the FCC record makes clear that Congress has already empowered agencies with national security expertise, including the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, Commerce, and Treasury. Myth: Title II is necessary so the FCC can use Section 214 to revoke the authorization of certain entities controlled by the CCP. I think that was also in her statement. That's the China, basically, Communist Party. And we're already doing everything we can. We've got certain equipment that can't be used here in the United States from Huawei, others that are considered covered equipment that you can't have here in the United States, and so that's already being handled. Myth: Title II is necessary for law enforcement. The federal government already has ample authority to advance its law enforcement goals without Title II. The DOJ and FBI have authority over ISPs through the Foreign Surveillance Intelligence Act, FISA, I guess, is that FISA? The Electronic Communications Privacy Act, the Wiretap Act, and many others. Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, that's CALEA. And interestingly enough, I did a stream about this a few weeks ago, that the FCC has, and who knows if this is going to stay in place, they have said that they want to start requiring internet service providers to have cybersecurity plans in place, to be implementing cybersecurity. And they're doing that under a section of CALEA. And that seemed to be a little bit of a reach for me. But they would have a better chance of letting that stick, because I know cybersecurity is very important to Brendan Carr. It's very important to, I think, pretty much everybody. It's a lot less of a partisan issue, let's say, than net neutrality. And again, when you have a need, that's when it makes sense to have regulations. And there is definitely a need for cybersecurity. That's something that we don't want to ignore. That's important for any business. It's especially important for broadband service providers because, number one, it's your business, right? So your business is providing access to the internet, to a network, to your customers. And if there's a problem because of cybersecurity, either you can't, whether it's ransomware or whether it's somebody's hacked into your systems and you can't provide that, that's bad. Plus, you are providers to other critical infrastructure providers. So the government's come out and said that broadband operators are critical infrastructure providers, and very important ones, because you provide internet connectivity, communication services to other critical infrastructure providers. So you as an ISP are going to be required to have cybersecurity in place at some point. You already are if you are applying for BEAD funding, if you're applying for USDA Reconnect. What's the other one? There was one other one where it was required. But I think moving forward, and again, the FCC has said that this is going to be done through CALEA, you as a broadband service provider are going to have cybersecurity in place. It's good for you. You need to do it anyway, but it's going to be a requirement. So, and we can do that for you, by the way. So when I'm done here, I'll put up our website and you can check that out. But we do have cybersecurity services if you need to take that. But that is something that, again, through CALEA, the FCC is already moving forward, it looks like, to do that. And then that was after they did this Title II stuff that they announced that. So here you see it says Title II is necessary for cybersecurity. It says, as with the FCC's invocation of national security, the agency makes no serious attempt to argue that Title II is necessary to promote cybersecurity. That effort is led not by the FCC, but by the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. So again, whether or not what the FCC wants to do with CALEA is going to hold up, I don't know, because again, it's not really in their purview. It really is more under DHS, and we've got this agency right here specifically for that. So one way or the other, it's coming. I don't know if it's going to be through CALEA, if they're actually going to be able to maintain that, or if it's going to come through this. The CIS, I think it is, CISA, they have already stated as well, again, that internet service providers are critical infrastructure providers, and that they are planning at some point in the future that ISPs will have to have a cybersecurity plan similar to what you'd have to have if you're going to take BEAD funding. So something, for example, NIST cybersecurity framework is most likely that what would be used. So that is coming, I think, one way or another. Myth here, Title II is necessary for public safety. The FCC rests this claim on a single event that it turns out has nothing to do with the FCC's Title II net neutrality rules. And this is the fire department that was talked about earlier, that Chairwoman Rosenworcel brought up. He says in that 2018 incident, fire department purchased a data limited plan that cost less than an unlimited data plan. So it was not net neutrality. It was that their data plan, what they had purchased, had limited data, and they used it all. So basically, it wasn't being throttled. It wasn't because it wasn't net neutral. It was because they had purchased a plan, and this is perfectly allowed. There's nothing that says that internet service providers can't say, hey, you get this much data, and then you can play for unlimited, and you get that much data. So it was handled. It says when the fire department hit that pre-specified limit, the service experienced a speed reduction as outlined in its plan before the provider made an exception and lifted the reduction. So it's not, as he says here, the FCC invokes this incident as a way that leaves one with the impression that this violated net neutrality, but it did not. In fact, the FCC's own rulemaking record makes that clear. For one, the FCC's Title II rules do not apply to data plans marketed only to government users like public safety agencies. For another, the Obama-era Title II rules expressly allowed providers to offer those types of data-limited plans. So again, there's nothing wrong with offering a plan like that. Myth, Title II is necessary for outage reports and network resiliency. Here, too, the FCC makes no coherent case for Title II advancing any of these interests. For one, the FCC already collects outage reports, operational status, and restoration information from broadband service providers. And again, not related to network neutrality. So why are we putting all of this in this one pot here? Finally, Title II is good for promoting additional broadband builds. The record cuts the other way on this one. After the FCC imposed Title II rules on the internet back in 2015, many broadband providers reduced their investments and halted the expansion of their networks. Again, I'm not prepared to fact check them there. I don't know if that's actually accurate. But again, I do know this, that more regulations generally do mean that businesses have less money. They've got more uncertainty generally when there's, especially if they're not sure what regulations are coming. But again, they've got to hire people to deal with the regulations. They have less money. They've got just basically more of a hassle to do business. So it generally is not good for business when you put regulations on, unless those regulations are interfering with a competitor of yours. Then you're happy, right? And in a sense, net neutrality, one thing that it did, net neutrality was all aimed at the internet service providers. But what we found, and I think I was even saying this way back when, is that the folks that were really limiting what you could get to or what you could see on the internet was the content providers. So the internet service providers, their business is to give everybody access to whatever they want, when they want it, unless it's illegal. There's certain things that they do not allow their customers to go to. Child pornography being one, but there's, could be things with violence, how to build a bomb. I don't know. Maybe some of that stuff's allowed, but there's certain things that you're not supposed to go to, right? So that you would expect. But everywhere else, they want people to go. The only question is, are they going to favor some traffic over others? But in general, their business model is to give everybody access to whatever they want. There were some concerns in the past about internet service providers that were providing video service, and they wanted to throttle competitive streaming services, and we did see some of that, and that was all worked out. Again, without net neutrality regulations, that was all worked out, and operators stopped doing that. But in general, that's what they want to do. But we saw with the big tech companies, social media, those kinds of things, search engines, that they were actually controlling what people could see. And we saw a lot of that with the Twitter files that were opened up. I think we've seen now Facebook has come out, Mark Zuckerberg has come out and said, hey, we're going to stop blocking certain content. We'll do community notes like X is doing now. So some of that's changing. Some of that, I think, is from the Trump administration coming in. And again, it's these companies realizing that if they don't do something on their own, that there may be regulations or legislation that comes around that could force that. So we're seeing some changes there. But it's interesting that it was the big tech companies that were the ones that were championing. They were the ones that wanted the net neutrality regulations, and yet they were the ones that seemed to be monkeying with the information that Americans were able to get, by blocking certain things and advancing other things. They had a lot of control over what you saw and what you didn't see, and that's something that I think, again, with the new administration coming in, and I think also just some light being shed on what was happening, between, let's say, the Biden administration and some of these big tech companies, and whether it's Facebook or Twitter, what was going on, and the COVID, some of the COVID stuff that was being blocked as misinformation, and then it turned out it was actually true. There was some stuff around the campaign last time that was blocked and turned out to be true. It was not misinformation. So I think maybe some of the companies recognize, we don't want to be involved in this. Let's just let everybody say what they want to say, and we'll have community notes that will then, the community come out and make a case that this is not true. So that seems to be where we're landing. But net neutrality, you're not going to see it for a while, partially because I think, again, we all realize that it's not needed at this point. 4 years from now, if a new administration comes in, I don't know if there'll be impetus to put it in again, because that'll be 4 more years that we won't have it. So unless there's a problem that crops up during that time, I don't know if there'll be the impetus to try to re-implement that. But maybe at some point there'll be a problem, and then it should be addressed in Congress, not through an agency where it can just be repealed again quickly like that. So those are my thoughts on that. So thanks for sticking with me on that. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. As I mentioned, if you need cybersecurity, you're going to need it now just for your own protection, but you're probably going to need it in the future to be able to do business. So it is a regulation that I think is coming. It could be through legislation. It could be through something, if the FCC gets the CALEA thing to stick, or through the cybersecurity agency somehow. It's very important that be put in place, because there are real risks there to your business as well as to national security and some other things there with cybersecurity. So that is something that needs to be addressed. So check us out, zquorum.com. Just go up to the menu, look for cybersecurity, and you can see everything that we offer there. Thanks for joining me. And if you like this video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it. If you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button, ring the bell, and you'll be notified when I'm live. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.